We made it happen. Jimmy was an incredible success. I don't know where he is. I got to find him. Gosh, I don't. Oh.
Oh yeah, George. Oh, George.
Right
George.
here. Yeah.
We did it, brother.
Yes, we
hey,
did.
Thanks to Dan. You know what? And in the ring with Dan and Benny. Hey, brother, man, hey, he's about the most cat. I just love him to death. I love you. Thanks for having me. Hey, you're the best. I'm telling you, brother. In the ring with
Dan and Benny.
Yeah.
We love you. Thank you so much.
Dan.
Mwah.
Oh yeah.
Hello, friends. Happy holidays, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Sebastian. I'm joined, as always, by the playa himself, Benny Scala. Benny, I see you're still live on location, traveling for the holidays. Did you have a good Christmas?
Absolutely. I took the Red Eye Special from Playaville, and I'm remoting from actually not so cold Minneapolis, Minnesota, just 137 miles southwest of parts unknown. And I hope that you, as well as our guests, which we'll introduce in a second, and everybody that listens to us had a great Christmas.
Absolutely. It was a great holiday season for a lot of people. Warmer than most of my friends. I mean, here in Virginia, it was 58 degrees. I traveled to see the family. It was in the 60s at one point. Like, so much for a white Christmas, but everybody had fun. Obviously, a big Italian family, so I spent most of the last 2 days eating, which is my personal favorite holiday tradition.
Great hobby.
But like you said, we've got a third guest on. I'm sure he enjoyed himself as well. Benny, why don't you tell everybody who that fine mug joining us this evening is?
Well, before I do that, Dan, I have here, this might be my last show because this is a shot of Fireball. And I just wanted to have a toast to you, our guest, and everyone that listens to our show. So it's been a great 2023, and I think it's going to be a spectacular 2024. So here goes.
Salud.
Nice. Salute. I've got my dog with me. We're saluting you.
I have a Coke Zero special.
There you
chaser.
go.
You're chasing a fireball with a Coke?
Just a Coke Zero.
Man, you're lightweight there, Benny.
I am. I'm a pansy. So
Fireball's like sugar water.
now I'm really wondering if we can call our guest a guest, and more like a great friend and a business partner. So we're joined by the one and only Mike Monty, the founder of our YouTube home, the Monty and the Pharaoh channel. Mike, welcome to Dan and Benny in the Ring.
Always an honor, guys. You know how much I love your show. I listen to you guys weekly, and I'm honored that you guys take your time out to appear on the channel, not just with the Dan and Benny in the Ring show, but also the 30, and hopefully 2024 reaps great rewards for all of us. And I think this will happen for all of us.
No doubt.
Absolutely. I do know, Benny, one thing that is not going to happen in 2024, a certain record set on the 30 will not be broken 2024. I know that much.
You mean the infamous Rip Rogers F-bomb record?
Well, that won't be broken either. But it'll be like I said before, the high score on the 30 will be DiMaggio's hit streak will fall before that does.
Well,
I will tell you that Jack Tunney's son did call in, and not since the Ultimate Warrior and Gorilla Monsoon forcing him to be suspended for his no-shows. Dan, this was your second no-show, one being his champion, nevertheless. So you could be in some trouble. There may be.
Hey, you know what? That first time, Benny messaged me and said that I was off to that day, and then I come to find out it was just his way of keeping the title hunt alive.
This reminds me of Vince Sr. double booking Bruno that one time. Like he booked him in Baltimore and Sheboygan, and Bruno he no-showed in Sheboygan, and he got blackballed.
Yeah,
very similar.
I mean,
by the way, not to get us off subject, but I did see a video out there which was shocking to me that Greg the Hammer Valentine hated Bruno Sammartino.
Really? No,
I was in shock to hear that. Yeah. Guess you check it out. It's not.
Did it have anything to do with his father?
No, he just. You know what, Benny, you might be right. Maybe I think Johnny Valentine did not like Bruno either. In fact, Greg talks about trying to knock the wig off of Bruno's head during that match.
Not a good move.
That's funny.
Not at all.
All we've had numerous guests on the show that worked with Bruno. And it's funny where he's like the one person I've never heard anybody say anything bad about. I'm definitely going to have to look up. We finally found somebody who didn't like him.
I mean, they even kayfabe his wig.
Yeah. No, I was shocked too. I don't think I've ever heard someone say they didn't like Bruno Sammartino. So Valentine even says, "I know he's a legend and all, but boy, did I hate that MFer." You know,
really?
He was going off. You got to check it out. It's a little strange.
That's crazy.
That is very interesting.
But we have a special show planned tonight. We always we try and mix it up a little bit. I know, Mike, you've always been real great with some of the input. And what I wanted to do tonight, because it's obviously Christmas week, we wanted to kind of have some fun. A couple of days ago, December 22nd, nationwide, the movie Iron Claw debuted. Obviously, we've talked about WCCW and the Von Erichs extensively on the show in the past. We've had people that have worked there, wrestlers that wrestled through Texas. But we had pitched the idea, Benny and I had talked about doing a review of the show, and obviously we wanted to reach out somebody whose opinion on movies we had. So tonight, for those listening and watching, we're going to just kind of have a roundtable discussion of the movie The Iron Claw, which, I mean, obviously, spoiler alert, we're going to get into it, but also, I mean, spoiler for a story that's, you know, over 30 years old at this point. But so that's what we were going to do. And I want to get, before we get into the nitpick details, Mike, obviously first to you. You saw it already. You mentioned you and your wife had gone out first time. You said the first time since COVID. Give us your opening thoughts on it.
So a lot of times I will go into one of these type of, can we call it like a somewhat of a documentary in some sort of way, right?
Yeah.
So going into it, usually I don't have high expectations, especially on movies surrounding pro wrestling, right? Because historically, they've all been pretty bad. Depending, I guess, on the person. But for me, they've all been pretty bad, with the exception of The Wrestler, which I consider one of the greatest movies made of all time. Forget about the pro wrestling aspect. So considering my love for WCCW and for the Von Erichs, and especially Kerry Von Erich, growing up, still love that guy. I had high expectations for this movie. If you could ask me how I came out of the movie, and we'll get into it, highly disappointed. Again, I've never made a movie, but whoever wrote that script did such an injustice to that story, in my opinion. I didn't like it. I don't. Okay. How can't you not like the story? We all know the story, right? It's an incredible story, but he just dropped the ball. That's just my opinion.
Well, Vinny, before we get too far, I know you did a lot more than I have. You've read up on a lot of the social media talk of it. What's the general? I mean, it's movies really only still technically we're in opening weekend. I know that would have ended Christmas Eve, but the movie's only been out for a few days, other than early screenings. What's kind of the general consensus so far?
You know, it's kind of, I would say, like right down the middle. There was a couple of people who really liked it. There were a couple of people who trashed it, but the overwhelming majority was, it was okay. I mean, several of them pointed out historical inaccuracies. Some pointed out, the fact that the characters, the actors maybe weren't as tall as the wrestlers, things like that. But I mean, kind of a mixed bag. But like I would say, on a scale of 0 to 5 stars, it scored maybe a 2.4 as far as social media reviews.
Okay. If the movie had screened in the Tokyo Dome, it would have gotten 4 stars. But
oh yeah,
very good.
Well, I just want to say my opening perspective, like you said, I went in with high expectations. It's a great story. A lot of these actors have proven themselves in the past, and it had a great cast. There were several real life wrestlers that were involved. There, obviously, the Von Erich family had some production inputs. Like, it wasn't a blanket no movie without them. But I just want to say, I was telling Benny the story when I went and saw it in the theater. a couple rows in front of me, there was an elderly gentleman with his, I assume, grandson, this maybe early 20s at the oldest, this kid that was with him. And it was, we've had Nikita Brezhikov on the show many times. Guy's like a walking encyclopedia. And that's exactly what it was like sitting behind him. This old man would start talking. I mean, he didn't talk through the whole movie. It wasn't distracting. It was great for me. But he's like telling his son something. He's like, "Oh yeah, they referenced something." He's like, "Oh, that was Dallas, September 8th, 1984." And he's like, "And the third match on the card was dead." And he's going into this whole spiel, and you could tell he's like so excited to be able to talk about it. I wish I had had the chance to ask him what he thought, because the way he talked, it was somebody who he had to have been in Dallas while WCCW was at its peak, the way he was invested. But it really kind of added a little highlight. But I want to say, from the history side of me, there were some issues. Overall, like you said, I didn't leave disappointed the way you said you did. I think from a cinematic standpoint, between like some of the acting and the shots and the choreography, or cinematography, I mean, some of that was very well done. There were some glaring, I made some notes, some issues that I had, and we'll get into it. But I want to get your thoughts, Mike, on the obvious issue for me right off the bat is there weren't enough Von Erich brothers in the movie.
Well, I want to start off with, so it's a great story you told about the older man in front explaining to his grandchildren what was going on. Right there is the problem with the movie in a nutshell, right? If you weren't a wrestling fan, you didn't get anything that was going on, right? Like, the film opens up with Fritz Von Erich in black and white wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know who Fritz Von Erich is. There's no introduction to the character whatsoever. The screenwriter, like, I felt like I was watching a Tony Khan production. I felt like it's like, this movie is for pro wrestling fans, and if you know nothing about pro wrestling fans, you will not get this movie whatsoever. The historical portion of it didn't bother me so much, because I felt, look, you only have so much time in a script to fit everything in. I mean, there's so many obvious issues with the movie as far as historically. I mean, you could start off with, Kerry Von Erich losing his foot right after he wins the NWA title. As we all know, that is not the case, right?
Yeah.
It's well
2 years,
after.
2 years later.
I was gonna say 2.5 years later.
Or, everybody made such a big deal about MJF being in this movie. They literally showed him for 1 second, and you had no idea who he was. Unless you're a wrestling fan, you didn't know that was Lance Von Erich. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And look, I want you to tell me what you liked about it, me and Betty, what you liked about it, and I'll tell you what I thought about what look, there was some decent parts to the movie, but I felt that there was so much meat in the story. It was so pro wrestling heavy. I couldn't stand it. I was like, I don't want to see actors portraying wrestlers doing a match. They had like 5 or 6 matches in that movie, and I'm like, stop it already. Who needs, in the wrestler, how many matches did he have? 2? It wasn't even part of the movie. You just knew he's a pro wrestler with all these issues. And the Von Erich story is pro wrestlers with all these issues. And they didn't emotionally grab me. Like, I don't know anything about the Von Erichs. I didn't fall in love with the characters at all. I didn't even fall in love with the fact that the brothers loved each other to the end. Like, they couldn't even get that message across. They didn't even get the message across between the obvious issue between Doris, right, and Fritz. Like that, there was meat there. And it was like, you wasted it by showing Freebird matches, a friggin' 5-minute Harley Race promo, a 4-minute Ric Flair promo. I was embarrassed to be a wrestling fan. I got to be honest with you. I was shaking my head going, boy, if someone's not a wrestling fan, they're going, what the hell is this? And who are these nerds watching this movie?
And I will say, since you brought it up, it was one of the notes I was going to get to. Aaron Eisenberg is not by any means a bad actor. He has done some phenomenal work. That was without question, including cartoon parody, the worst Ric Flair I have ever seen in my life. I mean, I don't know if he was intentionally not trying to be Ric Flair, if the direction told him not to have that swagger. His promo, the backstage bit when he's talking about, oh, where can I go get drunk in this town? If you need me, I'm gonna be at the Home Depot, the Holiday Inn. It was just there were some wrestlers in there, Harley Race, for example, Bruiser, Gino Hernandez, that I thought were very well done. Obviously, some of them were well-known wrestlers. I don't know why it looks like they ran out of budget and just grabbed the first person they could that could mildly woo. I thought the person playing Ric Flair was one of the weakest parts of that movie.
But let me ask you,
distractingly bad.
Did you need Bruiser Brody in this movie? Did you need Harley Race in this movie? Did you need Ric Flair? I mean, guys, they had like 4 matches or 5 matches in it. That could be exaggerating, right? But the one match they don't show is Kerry Von Erich winning the NWA title from Ric Flair. I don't even know where they were going with this. And go back to that locker room with Ric Flair. Like, you got Kerry and Fritz going, what did you do out there, Kevin? Like, Kevin was supposed to win the title, but he lost his temper and he overpowered him with the claw. I'm like, what are they doing here? Like, what is the point of any of this?
Yeah, it seems like there was times when they definitely, because you remember in the beginning when they're introducing the Von Erichs for the first time they team together, his debut, and they're backstage and he's talking with Bruiser and Gino. Okay, you're going to get a headlock, and they're clearly showing that wrestling is scripted. And then there's moments in the movie where they're playing it off like it's a real contest, and their dad is genuinely angry at them for not winning tonight. And it's like you've established that Fritz Von, you show him counting money. They show him doing books. Like, you've established he's running a wrestling promotion, but then he's getting angry that, why didn't you win tonight? It's your goddamn promotion. Like, you should know your son's not winning tonight.
Wait a minute. How about this one? There's a point where David dies and they try to get across that Fritz really is just this mean guy. So he basically says, guys, let's carry on, have a beer. And one of us is going to win the NWA title. Now, I don't know who to choose between Kerry and Kevin, so I'm going to flip a coin. He flips a coin, and obviously Kerry gets the shot, right?
Right.
But you don't know anything until the end of the movie where Kerry kills himself and is going to heaven, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
But he picks up a 2-sided quarter. And unless you're really paying attention to it, it's like, again, I don't get it. Like, I'm sorry. The WWE should have produced this movie. I mean, listen, I don't mean to take a personal shot. I think Evan Ginsberg could have done a better job with the script. I gotta be honest with you. It was maybe any of us could have did a better job with this. This was a story that you could have pulled that. Look, I end up crying at the end where Kevin says to the sons, the same line. I used to be a brother and now I'm no longer a brother, and the kids are hugging him, because that's how emotional this story is. And they just blew it, in my opinion. It really angered me, Dan and Benny. It really did. It had so much potential, and it wasn't any better than a made-for-TV movie.
Well, it goes back to what I was saying. A part of me understands. You only have it was a little over 2 hours, which is actually longer than most mainstream Hollywood movies. And I get that you can't tell the full story, but the heart and soul of this story is the bond between the brothers and the curse that inflicted the family. There had to have been a way to have everyone. They cut an entire Von Erich brother out of the story. Now, I get, he wasn't involved in wrestling. I get that he was basically Kerry. He couldn't handle it. Shot himself because Kerry shot himself with the same. That was a big deal when Kerry Von Erich killed himself. He made a deal, kill himself with the same gun. He was, when he called his brother, and was talking about, I want to die. He was telling, when he called Kevin, he was telling Kevin, if you listen to Kevin Von Erich tell the real story, basically like, I wish I had the kind of courage to do what he did. And then he went and killed himself, which also, unrelated side note of accuracy, having Kevin find Kerry's body and then attack his father the way he did, that's not what happened. But 2, that also kind of killed some of the build you were having, because you wanted this narrative of the curse, and Kevin was trying to get away from the curse, and he was getting away from the family because his dad told him, you sell the company, you're never allowed in this house again. And then he shows up and you completely hurt the narrative. And I get the whole thing where he carries his brother's body, and then, like you said, again, spoilers for people listening, but they had a scene where they very much implied that Kerry had gone to the afterlife and his brothers were there, and I thought that was a nice touch to kind of wrap up everybody's story. But you took what could have been the meat, really the heart and soul of the family story, and you wasted a lot of it on wrestling, some of which was bad, like the and I get, some of these guys were legit real wrestlers, but some of them were actors with a few months of wrestling training. Some of the wrestling was bad. Like you said, the Harley Race, the Ric Flair, the backstage stuff. You could have cut 20, 30 minutes of wrestling out of the movie and gone more to the family side. And then you could have included the whole family. To cut out an entire brother from the narrative really kind of hurt what I like when I'm trying to tell the story to my wife. It kind of hurt the story you're trying to tell. And I think back, one of the better examples I can think of is they made a movie years ago, many, many years ago, called Miracle on Ice, which was based on the 1980 Olympic hockey game. And in the movie, it was really focused on the players. They didn't even film games. They used footage from the real Olympics. But there was a scene in the movie where all the kids or the team is on the bus, and a guy's playing the guitar, and he's doing the Simon and Garfunkel song Homeward Bound. And they do a montage of the Olympics up to the championship game. In that 3-minute bit, shows them winning and building as a team. And the rest of the movie is them as players, as humans, as whatever. That's what they needed to do. Have a montage to, Tom Sawyer that shows 3 to 5 minutes of wrestling, and then back to the family narrative. Not, here's a story. And then, like you said, the whole thing with Lance Von Erich, because and Benny, correct me if I'm wrong, from what I read, they had actually filmed scenes that explained who Lance was, and MJF had a more prominent role, and then they cut it. Yeah. And like you said, if I hadn't have read that, hey, they cut MJF scenes, look for him in a blink and you miss it, where where Kevin wants to tag and Lance won't give it to him, which is another thing. Like, Kevin wants to, like, Lance went into business for himself, which, but you've got so many wasted opportunities to tell more of what is really one of the deepest family stories in wrestling, to show actual wrestling. I don't care. I'm a wrestling fan. I'm going to go see this movie. If I had taken my wife, she would not have gotten for what I did. And I know you mentioned your wife clearly didn't. And if it wasn't for that old man in front of me explaining everything to his grandson, he wouldn't have gotten anything from this movie. You want to tell the story, tell the story.
Here's an example. Kerry comes back from the Olympics, right? And they try to establish a Kerry, look, forget about the actor size and stuff. I kind of get why they do this, right? Because Efron, who's a pretty decent actor, he's not a big guy. Even though he got himself in great shape for this, they couldn't bring in a monster Kerry Von Erich. It would not have looked right. They did that for the wrestler with Mickey Rourke. They made sure he wrestled against smaller guys, so you didn't get this feeling like it was impossible for him to win. That's called good production and good rest, right? But so anyway, Kerry's working out, and then Mike, I think, plugs in his guitar and he starts playing, Tom Sawyer. And it starts jamming, and Kerry's shooting steroids, and here you go. And I'm like, okay, this thing's about to get good now. And then, like, okay, why did you play Tom Sawyer? Well, I know it's Kerry Von Erich's entrance music, but who else would have known that except unless you're a wrestling fan? Or there's a point in the movie, and I hate to be tearing it apart, but there's so many badly done parts in it. They go to SummerSlam, they show actual footage of the WWF match of Kerry against Mr. Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And Kerry comes home to Texas, and Fritz is like, I'm so proud of you. You have the number 2 greatest belt in wrestling. And why are they pushing Hellwig? No one knows who Hellwig is.
Yeah.
Nobody except a wrestling fan. What's the point? Again, back to how I felt it was a Tony Khan production. It was like, we're going to make this movie for wrestling fans because they're the only guys that will have the inside joke about this movie. Again, Dan, you just said it. It's one of the greatest stories in wrestling, as sad as it is. It's still this incredible story, and they just dropped the ball all over the place on this. Yeah, and I get why you liked it. You're a wrestling fan. I liked it too because I'm a wrestling fan, but as a movie goes, not a fan.
You know, it's funny. I didn't even think about that when he mentioned, he's like, when are you getting the title shot? Because you know your partner Hellwig's they're pushing him to the moon or whatever. It didn't even dawn on me that no one would know who Jim Hellwig is. You know, that's funny. Benny, coming back to, I know you talked a lot about like reading up on it. Any obvious, because you said it was kind of 50-50, any real obvious like holy cow this is great moments, or holy cow this is the one part everyone agreed that they hated?
The one universal that everybody seemed to hate was whoever played Flair. I mean, that was like across the board. Everybody said he was awful. You know, a lot of comments about MJF being non-existent in the movie, and then a lot of comments about the fact that, you know, Chris Von Erich really wasn't included. And a lot of people said, well, you know, being that he died the same way as Kerry did, or, you know, or it was, why prolong it? But in my mind, though, like the Mike suicide and the Chris suicide are two entirely different things, right? My understanding is Mike really didn't want to be in the business, but yet Chris wanted to be in there more than anything. So two different stories there, and they kind of missed out on that.
I think too, because what's important to note with Chris Von Erich was he had the I want to say it was asthma. He had something with his lungs that with all the medicine and steroids and stuff he was on as a kid stunted his growth and his muscular development and his cardio, that he couldn't have been a major star even if he wanted to. No disrespect to the man, but part of what drove him to what he had was this lifelong dream of being a brother in the family and never feeling like he measured up. And I think that would have fit so perfectly into what they were doing.
Sure.
And that's something. And Mike, I want to get your thoughts on this because you mentioned it. You know, where you talked about the meat and potatoes of Fritz and his marriage. No one who studies wrestling history, you can love WCCW for all you want. No one who knows wrestling history is going to remember Fritz Von Erich as a good human being, as a good person per se. He's very much in the same moniker of the Jackson's parent, you know, Michael Jackson's father, of basically just beating talent out of his kids. You know, the movie kind of made him deeper than I thought they were going to. He wasn't a straight villain per se, but there were definitely moments where you're like, wow, this guy's a piece of garbage. Especially, you know, I mean, obviously his story where they ended up divorcing and then he died kind of broken alone. You know, but I'm curious on that front where he really pushed a lot of, you know, Kerry and Chris. It was his drive of you have to get better now that kind of was the catalyst for some of that. And you talk about what you leave out. I think leaving Chris's story out of the movie kind of really killed some of the narrative of just how dark the family story was.
Well, I think the reality of it is, look, I don't know how in depth you guys got into WCCW, but being a long life WWE guy, right? And growing up on this, when I finally I saw Georgia Championship Wrestling, Florida Champion, and I liked it.
Yeah, same.
But when I saw WCCW, it was a totally different game. It was natural. The wrestlers were natural. They weren't overly big. They didn't have overly great mic skills. Everything seemed very natural. So if you ever watch these old Von Erich interviews, they're not refined interviews. They're like some young kids looking to win championships. And, you know, you go back to the Jimmy Garvin interviews or the Gino Hernandez or the, Chris Adams and even Brian Adidas. They're all these unrefined interviews, but it gave you this feeling like this is high level wrestling with great storytelling. And the movie starts off where you think they're going to establish something. So I think they're trying to establish that Fritz is too tough on Mike, and Kevin eventually goes to Doris, his mother. I think it's Doris, right? And says, hey, I think Dad's too tough on Mike. And she says, you handle it. So I'm thinking, okay, you're going to start evolving these characters, right? But they just never go anywhere with the character. And that's the problem I had. I mean, at the end, when Doris is painting and Fritz wants his dinner, I guess they established that she was done with him and that he no longer was going to run her life. I don't they just didn't tie the pieces, and you couldn't become, we always talk, Benny, Dan, about wrestlers getting you invested in their character. This movie doesn't get you invested in any of the characters. Did you feel a connection to either Kevin? The closest connection I felt was Mike. because I felt bad for Mike, and he does a pretty good job after, he gets that, high temperature and he starts, having trouble speaking. But
Yeah.
I don't, Dan, I don't know if I answered the question. The only,
No, no,
I
that's
just don't think there's enough stuff established at all in any of the characters. And it was just a wrestling movie to be a wrestling movie. And I can't imagine, I really can't. I don't know. A24 really puts out pretty decent movies. And I'm surprised that that script made it past somebody, because it just wasn't good. Look, it's a real story, so it can't be bad, right?
right.
It's true. It's like this is the truth about this family, so it can't be bad. But the script was so bad, it wasn't good.
No, I agree. I agree with you. My biggest complaint, and like you said, was looking at The Wrestler, in that this should have been a movie about the Von Erich family with wrestling as a backdrop. This was a movie about WCCW with the Von Erich story sprinkled in. And as a wrestling fan, especially as a wrestling historian, I appreciated some of the details they went into, where, everything from, where like the booking and how in some of the later scenes, the arena was changed because the Sportatorium had gone through an upgrade at the end of 85, I believe. So like no one would have noticed, oh, hey, the ropes are the right colors for this year. I liked some of the little details they did, or when Fritz is doing the books and he's got Andre the Giant's name on there because he came through Texas, in 84, right before he went back to when he was still in a kind of a secondary arrangement before WrestleMania. And it's like, I liked some of the little details, but there was so much of the family story. Like you said, that scene at the end when she's painting and Doris kind of blows Fritz off, like they separated. She left him. She was done with all the BS. That really kind of didn't hammer home, and she was a very minor character in some of the presentation. It really didn't hammer home that she was the heart and soul of a lot of what was happening, the strength the family had, because the brothers couldn't go to their father for shit. So, also I think something that kind of irritated me was she's at home watching Carrie win the championship. Correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a long time, but she was there. Like the whole family, they have the picture and they're hugging. And to have her just kind of, I guess, for the first time in like they almost made it like her watching Carrie was the first time she ever watched wrestling. Because there was even moments where it's like, hey, Mom, did you see that? No, I don't. I'll stay in the car. You guys go do your wrestling. Like she's sitting in a parking lot for 4 hours, 5 hours while they're running a wrestling show. They kind of played that off. But
yeah, by the way, if you go by that script, every great match is on television. Just tune in. You can watch every match on television, everybody. Don't buy any reviews. It's there for you right on your turntile, But here's another thing that really pissed me off, guys, was this. So David throws up at the wedding, right? And it looks like there's blood in the toilet. Like not just throw up. It looks like blood, okay? Yeah. And it's like Kevin's like, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay. You really should go to the doctor." "No, I'm okay." And then they do the 2-step. And then the phone rings. This is how quick the scene goes. David's dead. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
They do a funeral. And, it's like, it's just these important details of Kevin sitting at the table and say, please don't go to Japan, right? He's told that story a million times. David, do not go to Japan. I just don't have a good feeling about this. It's like so many misses here that you can get emotional about it. It's just like done. I don't know.
Well, I think too they kind of glossed over because, like you said, he got sick at the wedding. Then they're dancing, and then it cuts to to Kevin driving home, and he sees the other car leaving, and he realizes that's something just happened. And it's somebody had just told Fritz, hey, they found, because the story where he was found in the hotel room, and Fritz is like, oh yeah, he died of a ruptured intestine. They didn't know that. I mean, and this is one of the little minute details that irritates me. They didn't know that the second they found his body. Like the first call was, hey, Fritz, we found Kevin. His body's not even cold yet, ruptured intestine. Like they didn't know that right away. I get they wanted to kind of get the story out there, but the fact that there was no what happened, there was no I knew he shouldn't have done it. They kind of it really felt like of all the deaths that they had in that movie, they really kind of rushed his, and it was like, okay, next, and now we're back to the story of Kevin and Carrie.
Well, think about it this way. I like from every guy I've spoken to throughout, our time doing this stuff, right? They were big time partiers, right? They did so many drugs. They didn't even
Right.
get that point across. You know what would have been great? Like, Butch Reed told a story that Kerry tied his boots together before their match. He was so high and he fell over himself. Like, establish that Kerry became a major dope head, right? He
Yeah.
was just a dope. Like, establish that these kids had a lot of problems, It's like they just, like, you're talking about all those minute like, that was great. You're right. In the book, seeing those names, that was like a
Right.
little nice little Easter egg. But everything it didn't matter to me because it was like, you guys have jacked this up so bad that you could try anything to make me get impressed at this point. I'm just like, I was embarrassed that my wife was sitting next to me and I made her go to this movie. I was like, wow.
I will point out that scene was the reason I remember it so vividly, because I was telling the wife about it, is he's in the book and the names are accurate for that show, which I thought was a great detail. And he's watching the TV and he sees Ric Flair beat Harley Race in the steel cage, which, okay, fine, argument whether or not he could have been able to watch that live. But then the TV turns off. That TV didn't have a remote. It's one of those, it's little details like that always irritate me. Big knobs on the TV, anybody that's ever had to turn a dial on a TV knows a TV with those big knobs, you got to get up and change the channel.
You're the remote.
You're not getting up and changing the channel with a remote. The TV that doesn't have one.
Maybe your shoe.
But him getting up to turn the TV off would have cut in another 2 minutes of the script. They would have had to cut out another brother. Like they would have forgot David died. We just ran out of time, man. Let's go over David at this point because you don't want him getting up turning the TV off.
They would have glossed over it. I do think, and that was something you talked about, was because Kevin tells the story, it was really the whole family. They basically made it look like Carrie was, they had the scene where he's taking he's injecting himself and you see him doing coke when they go to the concert and he's doing coke at the party and then he's snorting up the pain pills after he lost his leg, which that was something, Benny, you mentioned the timetable. He wins the title and then I'm going to go for a ride. And then it cuts to him where he comes around the counter, which I will admit, I thought was a very well framed shot where if you don't know the story, when you see him walk around, when he comes around the kitchen counter and you see that his foot's missing, but that story from him winning the title to his injury, to his recovery, that was about a period of about 3 to 4 years. And they made it look like he hurt his foot, he got the boot, and he's in the backyard with Kevin training through the pain in a span of a couple of months. That was a deep, dark period that laid a lot of the groundwork for what would happen to Carrie and Chris and some of the other stories. And you just glossed over it to go have, another bit where, we can talk about him being Intercontinental Champion or whatever, which was also kind of something they glossed over. Remember when he was in the WWF, yes, they mentioned the Von Erich name, but he was the Texas Tornado. They told him not to do the claw. We're not going to talk about WCCW. When he beat Mr. Perfect, he beat him with a tornado punch because that was his big thing, was the discus punch, So it was, I'm surprised they didn't emphasize, Fritz is happy his son's a champion, but at the same time, that's not Kerry Von Erich that's on TV. The Texas Tornado is the Intercontinental Champion.
It just sounds to me like that, a lot of this is just a time management problem that, that Mike was telling me when we were chatting this afternoon that both Flair and Race's promos are 10 minutes long. And, that coupled with all the, the excess wrestling action, if you had taken 15 or 20 minutes out of that time, you could have developed the story of David better. And, Kevin begging him not to go. You could have had more about Mike, and you could have included Chris. I think, they could have just, if they had better used the time, I think it would have been a far better product.
You didn't need much wrestling in this movie. You didn't need any promos in this movie. The only promo you needed is to establish Kevin as being very poor in the mic, which they did, right? And that's where you kind of get the feeling when Fritz realizes, and Kevin originally says his choice, and then he realizes, ooh, David's my guy. David's the guy that's going to get me that NWA title. So, you brought up so many great points. I mean, not to get off the movie, but what were your feelings about WCCW, you guys, and what were your feelings about Kerry Von Erich's run in the WWF?
Go ahead, Benny.
To me, it was disappointing because they barely acknowledged that he was a Von Erich, like you said. They didn't include any of his prior history. I mean, any wrestling fan knew, his pedigree, but they never. It was like anybody. It was like Barry Windham came in and he was the Widowmaker, and then he was the Stalker, and Ricky Steamboat even was the Dragon later on. It's like, or and Hennig was Mr. Perfect. Why not? You're the biggest wrestling company now. You can afford to acknowledge where these guys came from. I just thought his wrestling, his career in WWE started out with a bang, but then it just, it was like they do with so many guys. Then it's one, one shot, and then they kind of just slide him down the card. Because once he lost the title, if memory serves me correctly, he almost started jobbing out after that, didn't he?
Yeah, they did touch on that in the movie where he says, they're only using me for house shows, and they ended up using because he was still popular, very much over, but they used Kerry or the Texas Tornado to start pushing when they brought in John Nord with the Berserker. He was the face that fell to the Berserker, and then since the Berserker went nowhere, it kind of killed whatever momentum he would have had anyway.
Let me ask you this. Do you guys remember them because I was always surprised they didn't try to bring Kevin in and have them try to be a tag team. Because they could have got a lot of mileage out of that. Did they ever try to bring Kevin in?
No, from all intents, it seems that Kerry was the only one they really wanted, and he was obviously already on his downturn. What I thought was the big missed opportunity in the Kerry's real life was that they hid his injury. They could have built this story of here's this Texas legend who lost his foot and he had to train through adversity, and they could have had him. I mean, WWF in the early 90s loved their vignettes. Everybody had a job, everybody had vignettes. It could have been him training with the artificial boot on. I know Kerry really didn't want people to know, but you could have built this great conquering hero, and then Mr. Perfect could have attacked. He could have gone after the ankle and gone after the foot in the match, and then or gone after the leg, maybe not the foot. But that they had this opportunity to build a hero and just kind of brought in somebody who. And this goes to what we've talked about on the show many times, was the magazines. They never once said WCCW legend Kerry and former NWA heavyweight champion, but anybody who was a wrestling fan back then knew who Kerry Von Erich was. I think they kind of dropped the ball on that. As far as WCCW, it really does belong in the echelons when people talk about great territories. Their run from 80 to, or I should say maybe the 70s even before, but their peak when it was 80 to 86, like peak golden era territory days, that was some of the best wrestling. The Von Erichs and the Freebirds, 20,000 plus at their Parade of Champions shows. That was, that's up there with Rock and Roll and Midnight. Like, you're headlining weeks and months and years of shows with a tag team feud. Like, that was one of the biggest, most profitable feuds in the world at the time. They deserve that credit. I just think if you're going to tell the story of the Von Erich family, you don't. That, like I said, that was my biggest issue with that with Iron Claw, was that it was a movie about WCCW and not about with the Von Erichs almost being the subplot, or really. And I take nothing away from Zac Efron. I get he's the biggest star, and Kevin Von Erich being the sole survivor. But this was really a movie about Kevin Von Erich. Like, he was definitely the main character and the main focus of a lot of the story. It was seen through his eyes, through his, like I said, go ahead.
Which I think is okay, Dan. I think that was okay, but you're right. It was about WCCW, but you know what the problem is? They even dropped the ball on that, because beyond the story of the Von Erich, you still got Gino Hernandez, Chris Adams. I mean, there's a lot of meat to this entire story. They could have went a million different ways with this to make it interesting to the regular movie goer. One interesting fact I do want to share. Numerous guys have told me, I was telling this to Benny, I have a DVD that I ordered so many years ago, and it was from the drummer who played for the Freebirds on the Freebirds song. And I guess they had a band at some point. They were friends. And there's a clip in there, and there's a phone call from Michael Hayes saying when he got to WWF, Vince wanted to take the belt off of Hogan and put it on Michael Hayes for Rock and Wrestling, which I don't believe. But
No.
I digress. Many of the wrestlers have told me that we've interviewed that Vince first contacted Fritz before he went to Hogan, and he wanted Kerry to be the WWF champion, and Fritz wouldn't let him go. Imagine if that would have happened. McMahon's a pretty lucky guy. If he would have chose Kerry, God knows what would have happened to the organization. It would have fell flat on its face.
Yeah, it would have been interesting because that's like the story you hear a lot with Hogan, where if he everybody knows that Dusty was plan B. Hogan would have run with Dusty as the conquering babyface if he hadn't gotten Hogan. And then when Dusty didn't come in anyway, that was the part of the polka dot screw you gimmick, was the, this is what you could have had. But I think too, something that kind of gets lost in it all, and this is something because Benny, we've talked a lot about how good voices can really make or break a show. Was Bill Mercer. He was front and center in a lot of the movie. They never once acknowledged who he was or had him introduce himself. If you look at the credits of the movie, he's credited as ring announcer.
Yeah.
Like he was, and they showed him in the back talking to Fritz, talking to Kevin. He wasn't just an announcer; he was backstage too. I think it kind of goes again because Mercer's one of those guys you hear when they talk about these great, echelons of sports commentators where he could have.
You know what's funny, Dan? I wasn't sure if that was Mercer or that was Mantell, or if it was even who's the manager at the time. The guys, help me. Who's
Gary
the big
Hart?
manager? Gary Hart.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if it was which one of them, because obviously they were the booker and they were actually involved in the financials. So I go, is this Mercer?
You know
is
what?
This
That's
Hart? Or
that's
is this supposed to be Mantell? I had no idea.
No, that's a fair point. Now you got me questioning. I just assumed because he was in the suit in front of the classic WCCW logo. I just assumed that was Mercer they were going for, but they never really acknowledged him, which I thought was kind of a shortcoming. But as we kind of wrap up, I do want to, since we've done a good job criticizing, I do want to talk though some of the things I thoroughly enjoyed. Yes, the movie had more wrestling than it needed to, but I thought the scenes with the wrestling were just very well done. As far as if you're not a wrestling fan, you'd still appreciate they were well shot, the angle, because I mean obviously if you're filming a movie, so you're going to get camera angles you'd never see in a match. You don't have a guy in the ring holding a camera at an upward angle to get drop kicks. I think the scene when Kevin's wrestling Harley Race and he gets suplexed outside and they kind of play that he was hurt for real because, Race threw him down too hard or whatever. I think they did a good job showing that wrestling is painful. I mean, we hate using the word fake, but, I think that the actual wrestling scenes were very well shot. I think a lot of the acting, even ignoring, like Benny said, ignoring how some of the actors weren't the right size. I think some of the casting, other than Ric Flair, was phenomenal. I would like to have seen I'll wait for the DVD to come out to see the deleted footage of MJF and Fritz arguing about Lance wanting more money and that's why he got fired. But I think from a cinematic standpoint, you can't it's good. The quality of the movie is good. A24 has always been good with production. But yes, there were some moments. If I was in charge of the script, I would have told the Von Erich story with wrestling in the background. This felt more like a wrestling movie with the Von Erich story in the background, and it was told through the eyes of Kevin, which I get. He's the sole survivor. But I would have done exactly like you said, Mike. I would have done it like The Wrestler. I would have told the personal story with the wrestling sprinkled, like the Parade of Champions, Kerry winning the title. You have to show at least some of that. Having Fritz watch him win the Intercontinental title. Okay. Kevin in their first tag match, maybe a montage of them fighting the Freebirds to establish, you're selling 20,000 tickets for these big events. I get that. I don't know. I think from a cinematic standpoint, it was not a bad movie. It's just from a wrestling. If I wasn't a wrestling fan as much as I am now, I would not have enjoyed it the way I did. But as we, go ahead.
No, I agree. You're right. You're 100% right. I mean, I'm sure when it shows up on Max, I'll watch it 85 times. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
like I said, I went into this with high expectations. They put enough on the, the pre, all those video before they put a movie out, right?
Yeah, the
And
trailers.
I was like, the trailer, thank you. That I was like, this has got to be a home run. And but again, I'm not trying to destroy it, but I knew there was a problem right in the beginning of the movie with the black and white start with Fritz von Erich. I mean, look, I love movies. I'm not a writer. I'm not like you and Benny at all, but I certainly know what makes movies or what I enjoy. And if you can't establish a character in the first 5 minutes of a movie, you got a big problem. And they weren't establishing anything. It took a long time even to get it. And honestly, to bring Kerry into the movie, literally, I had to think it was like 30 minutes before you even saw Kerry.
Right.
Right. It's almost like a letdown. If you're a wrestling fan and you didn't know who the actors were, so you didn't know who was portraying whatever, could you imagine waiting? I'm waiting for Kerry. I'm waiting for Kerry. I'm ready. They're talking about him. He's in the Olympus. And here's Kerry, and he's 5'9", you know, you know, twiggy arms. I'm like, this is a letdown,
Yeah.
dude. This is not, Kerry Von Erich. Maybe they should have, when he was shooting the steroids and they were playing, Tom Sawyer, all of a sudden they should have changed actors, and all of a sudden Kerry was this beast.
Well, I will say, from a casual standpoint, if you're a non-wrestling fan, or you maybe were a lot like, the fans from the 80s and 90s that stopped watching wrestling, Kerry Von Erich is definitely the most recognizable name from that family, even with what Kevin has, obviously what he's done with his family. I think you had, because Kevin's sons wrestle, they were just on AEW, a week ago. And then, of course, Kerry's daughter wrestled. She had a good run in TNA and the Indies under the name Lacey Von Erich. I like that where they ended with that shot of the whole family at the ranch where there were, the brothers and Lacey and Kevin and all. I just think, they like you said, I think they dropped the ball, but from a fan standpoint, I think if you're going to do that, where you're going to bring Kerry in late, I'm curious why they didn't start the movie in late 80 instead of starting it, in the beginning, like where you're just establishing. I mean, Kerry, when he comes back from the Olympics, it was a year before he really established himself as a wrestler. They could have started the movie in 81 and just had a past montage or whatever and gotten into the meat and potatoes of the brothers bond. But I mean, I think, like I said, it wasn't by any means bad, like you said. When it comes out at home,
But
I'll
there
watch
lies
it
the
again.
problem. They couldn't establish where they were going with this script, because in the beginning it was like, is this going to be focused on Kevin and eventually his failures in his father's eyes, and that's why he falls out of favor with his father? It just was all over the place, right? Like Benny was saying earlier, it's like too much info, and you didn't have enough time to do it, so you just like trying to cram it in. And again, I wanted to be emotional in this movie. I wanted to be a tear jerker, right? I mean, I cried at the end of The Wrestler, and I'll tell you, I mean, I don't give a shameless plug, but I mean, if you go to the Peacock, to the WWE documentaries, the one on Kurt Angle, the one on the most famous fan, what's his name, Igor.
Yeah,
I don't know if you guys,
the super fan.
The super fan.
Yeah.
Now they just came on with one with Braun Strowman with the Milwaukee Murders, where they ran through that crowd.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot cry during that documentary, that's what I was saying. They got to put this type of movie in the hands of someone that knows what they're doing. I clearly felt like the screenwriter did not know. I felt like he was a wrestling fan and he wanted to appease the wrestling fan. And you don't make movies that way. You just can't make a movie that way. The Wrestler was not made for the wrestling fan. That was made for everybody.
Right. And well, I mean, yeah, the fact that revitalized Mickey Rourke's career, and there were award nominations. I mean, people, non-wrestling fans took notice, and even to the point where, you saw, I don't want to say movies, but people having to explain, like, here's what's real, here's what, because, oh my God, The Wrestler was so good, but do they actually cut themselves like that? Like he did, where I think they really touched on a lot of that, which they did well. But Benny, I kind of want to touch more so on some high notes. You talked about, you obviously universally social media hated Aaron Eisenberg's Ric Flair, which I agree was my least favorite part of that movie. What about the positives? What was kind of the general consensus of what they hit out of the park on this one?
I really have to say, though, it was almost that they liked the movie because there was wrestling in it and they were wrestling fans. It wasn't anything of like any note. It was just the fact that, I'm a wrestling fan. I went to see a movie about wrestling and I liked the wrestling. There was no positives towards the storyline, which to me is the most important thing.
I like wrestling. I mean, come on, man.
Yeah, but that's
Look
what
at
that
this.
is.
But let me ask you something. You go to this movie, wrestling fan or not a wrestling fan, did you come out going, oh my God, when the Von Erichs names are mentioned again on the streets of New York, people are to go, that's that famous wrestling family.
Yeah.
You don't come out of that movie feeling that way at all. Like, the Von Erichs are no better known than they were before that movie, after the movie. People should be coming out of that movie wanting to look up on YouTube or anything about the Von Erichs. They want to know the story. No one's coming out of that movie going, oh, I want to find out more, because it was like, just,
Yeah. I mean, I have to think about it, because I talked about that with the Dark. I thought the Dark Side of the Ring episode did a much better job of putting their name out there in such a way. And granted, I also think that's because one of the centerpieces of the Dark Side of the Ring story was Jim Cornette and some of the stories he told, because he worked deeply with Kevin and all them. And I mean, if you hear a voice, if there's anybody that can talk about wrestling and get non-wrestling fans interested, it's Jim Cornette, the way he tells stories. But I think that did more to it. I also think about it from a purely business standpoint. Is the WWE, they own the WCCW footage. Kevin sold it to them in the 90s. Are they going to say, hey, Banner, if I open the WWE part of Peacock, hey, look at these WCCW matches, because everyone's talking about the Von Erichs now. I don't think they're going to invest the time or money into pushing, hey, come see our WCCW footage. Maybe they'll throw a tweet out, but I don't think it did a good job getting the personal story. It definitely did a great job getting the territory out there. Probably non-wrestling fans that had never heard of WCCW know more about the territory and wrestling in Dallas and the Sportatorium, and we go as far north as Missouri. And I do think I give the movie credit for that. They did a phenomenal job showing how popular outside of wrestling the Von Erichs were. Like when they're at the restaurant and fans are coming up, autographs. And I mean, obviously you didn't have a lot of people getting pictures back then, but where even she asked them, she's like, are you this popular everywhere? They don't like me in Missouri, but you couldn't walk. It's like Bruno in New York. The Von Erichs couldn't walk anywhere within 20, 25, 50 miles of Dallas and not have somebody recognize them.
Well, I think that scene right there was a great scene, right? You establishing the relationship between him and his wife, which I didn't know until recently. They're still married to this day.
Yeah,
but then again,
40 years they've been together.
Right. But now they waste 3 minutes on camera showing them having sex in a truck. What was the point? Like, what's the point there? There was no point to that. It's like, let's leave the bar and have sex and let's show it. What? Why?
Not only the sex in the truck, but they spent more time than they should have establishing that was Kevin Von Erich losing his virginity in that scene.
Yeah, right. Right.
Where even he when he straight up was like, "Have you done this before?" Yeah. What does that have to do with anything? It's like, oh, come on. You could have had a montage of them, or like, I hate to say it, but like they did at the wedding, where Fritz told Doris, he's like, let's get out of here. She's like, well, you ain't got to worry about getting me pregnant again. They were going to go fuck in the parking lot, but they didn't. The camera didn't follow them back there.
But you're establishing that relationship. Here's the thing that it's really troublesome. Like, I've always felt like the WWE had a huge opportunity to grab those Von Erich kids, and if they're smart enough, you somehow have a Freebird kid. Like, doesn't even matter if that's Michael Hayes' kid or not. Who gives a crap, right? You have you could actually have rebuilt that. But this movie, I'm telling you, it was number 6 in the country and number 5 in the country. And again, with movies, not a ton of people go to movies anymore. I don't think they usually stay home. So I don't know how that's even evaluated. It's almost like ratings in wrestling. But if this movie could have been done better, you could have had the Von Erichs in the WWF and you could have really done something with it. But instead, they're just going to be not forgotten, but they're going to be the same they were before this movie. And that's what I didn't want to see, because to me, I hold WCCW close to my heart, man. I mean, listen, I'll be honest with you. I ordered for Christmas a Kerry Von Erich autograph, which are very rare, right? You can't find them anywhere.
Right.
But I found someone that had one. But that's how important Kerry Von Erich was to me and WCCW. And I just felt that the movie did not do that family justice. Whether it's Kevin's fault or the screenwriter's fault, I don't know. But I didn't come out of there knowing if Fritz was a good guy or a bad guy. I didn't come out of there knowing that the boys had drug problems. I didn't come out of there knowing that was Mike being like, nothing was established in that movie. It was just a movie about something. I mean, I hate to say it. You know what I mean? Like I said, when it comes on Max, I'll probably watch it 100 times, but it's like, I was just disappointed. I hate speaking about it that way because I don't want to be a hater, because I don't know how to write and I'm not a screenwriter and it's easy for me to sit back and attack it. But this wasn't, for me, this was a very important movie and they just stepped all over it. And I'm just not happy about it. That's all.
If I could add my 2 cents, and from what you guys said, this is my take, that if I took a date to go see The Wrestler, at the end of the night, she's going to say to me, that was really good. I really liked that. And now if I took that same date, a year later to see the Iron Claw, her first thing, on the way home, I would have to explain everything, all the backstory to her, because she didn't get it in the movie. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Yeah. I think about one of the, and I've talked about it before on the show. My wife is not nearly as big a wrestling fan as I am, but she'll definitely watch stuff with me. She has the knowledge. She's been there and she's very supportive of me liking it. I would have been the same thing. She would have had 100 questions about this movie because it was built that this movie was made for us. This movie was made for guys that have studied and watched film and written stuff and talked about it and interviewed some of the guys that were there. And, I watched the Gino Hernandez documentary and I know, that whole scene where they talk about Gino and Bruiser, whatever you do, don't kill us out there. That's a prophetic note because neither of those guys are going to be alive, for the end of this film. You have these little nuances, like you said. I won't say Tony Khan because AEW's really upset me recently, but yes, this reminded me of, I was at a live AEW show when they introduced Takeshita, and he came out, no name on the Titantron, no recognizable music, and it wasn't until he was already in the ring that somebody else on the stage mentioned, "Hey, look who it is," blah blah blah, and you could see the crowd open, or hear the open, it was. What there was this big moment. Oh my God, here's a great debut, and it's who the hell is that? It was, you could hear the energy just being sucked out of the building, and that's what this movie reminded me of. There was moments where I'm ecstatic, but I could see people I was in the theater with that were like, huh? And I'm like, this movie wasn't made for them. It was made for me. I enjoyed this movie.
But you even brought it up there. You don't know anything about wrestling. And they're like, so Gino and Bruiser will do this and that. Okay, great. Don't kill me. If you're somebody like, who's Gino? And you like Gino? Okay, yeah, who's Gino and Bruiser? I don't really know who they are. Who, you know what I mean?
Right. Or I mean, even the fact that they mention it, when he first talks about it, he's like, you're going to go out there with Bruiser Brody. And Fritz mentions it like that's a big deal. 99.9% of non-wrestling fans or even casual wrestling fans have no freaking idea who Bruiser Brody was.
But it's a perfect example, just like in The Wrestler, when they're like, the first card, Samoan 1 against Samoan 2 and Andrew Anderson, and they're just names, right? And it was it didn't matter for the movie, but it seemed real because you're naming the card off. So the point is, yeah, like it's okay to be in the movie, but the reality is they wanted it to go over. So someone like you or me would go, oh my God, it's Bruiser Brody. It's
Right.
Chino Hernandez. And
Yeah,
instead it was like,
that scene could have been them talking to two random people that they never even
the
mentioned their
Mulkey Brothers.
names. And yeah,
Yeah, right.
exactly. They never even mentioned their names.
Ding
Or you
dongs.
could have gone. I don't know if you guys remember, years ago they did a made-for-TV movie about Jesse Ventura's run for governor, and it was co-produced by WCW. So when they cut to Jesse Ventura's wrestling career, it's a WCW ring, and he's like, it's like tonight Jesse Ventura against Disco Inferno, because they had to use the people they had the rights to. As a fan, I thought it was hilarious. That's what I would have done. That I would have had. I would have had Kevin and I would have had Kevin and what was that, Kevin and David. I would have had them talking to the Bushwhackers or somebody completely random that weren't right to history, and no one would have noticed. But that was my biggest beef with this movie, despite the fact that I will say I gave it, like Benny said, three. I would have said closer to 3 or 4 than 2. Like I'm not gonna. I'll definitely watch it again when it comes out on streaming. But this movie was made for me by someone who just wants wrestling fans to be happy.
Let me ask both you guys this question. So they establish that Kevin gets married and he has kids and he's got this relationship and he doesn't want to go home because he doesn't want the bad luck to run off to his family, which was okay, pretty cool. At no point do they establish that Kerry gets married. Like, wouldn't it have been emotional if Kerry killed himself at the funeral? You see the kids crying because their daddy killed himself,
right?
Because he was selfish or whatever the situation is.
And that's it. Not even married. He had children. His daughter grew up to be a wrestler. Like, the fact that they just, he shot himself at the tree and then he's in heaven. Like, I'm finally with my brothers again. And they just sort of glossed over that he had a family too.
That's a good point. What does Lacey Von Erich feel about that? Like, hey, I'm home to my brothers. Life is good. Who cares about my kids that I had? Not even thinking about them, right? I'm in heaven with my brothers.
Or you remember when he brings the girlfriend home after he wins the Intercontinental title, and when he's on the phone with Kevin, he's like, "What happened to what's her name? Oh, I don't remember." Like, Kerry just kind of whatever. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot. I had a wife and kids. Didn't I?
What was the point? What was the point to even bringing that girl there? Like, what establish? Like, when you bring in characters, you have to establish a character. You just don't bring them in so they're there. It's almost like, oh, let me bring my wife in so she can have a cameo in this movie as Kerry Von Erich's girlfriend. Like, what was the point? What was the point to him giving him the gun and him putting it in the cabinet and not wanting to shoot it? Like, what was the point to that whole thing? Because he went and got it himself and killed himself at the end? Because you can't even tie those two things together. It's like, what? There's so many things in this movie that they don't do anything with.
No, that's a fair point that because I made a note of that and I completely forgot to even bring it up when he gives his dad the gun, and I talked about it earlier with when Chris shot himself, because Kerry and Chris used the same gun and they made emphasis. Kerry made it very clear, I want to use that gun. They introduced the gun. They have the whole scene, why the fuck don't you want? And he's like yelling at his dad, cursing at him, like, why don't you want to do this?
Which, by the way, made no sense. Like, why is he yelling at him? I had no idea. I was like, what is this about?
They never bring up the gun again. He just shoots himself, and that's it. Now, they did have the shot where they showed Fritz's gun cabinet with all the pistols in it. But you introduce this gun, you make this big point of it's a collector's gun. It's an anniversary edition of the Smith & Wesson. And then they never mention that, when Fritz, when he gets the call that, hey, you might want to look at Kerry, because Fritz was pouring concrete. He goes to the house and he sees the gun. The gun is missing from the box. And that's when he goes and finds Kerry, not David hearing the shot when he got home. But, at least if you're going to have if you're going to have Kevin find him, have Kevin see the gun missing from the box. You introduce this plot point and then it just goes nowhere. Like,
so Benny, you basically saved yourself $18.94.
Well, and when you guys were I remembered reading today that supposedly Kerry had a conversation with Bret Hart, and he said something about wanting to go see his brothers in heaven, and Hart said, I think your daughters on earth are more important than your brothers in heaven. And it sounds like that was another thing. They completely glossed over that.
Well,
That
I
could have
think
been a great scene in the movie.
yeah.
Like you
Right?
could have used
Yeah,
that
yeah.
in the movie, right?
And I think it's important to know too, because Kevin tells the story when Carrie called him, and he in the movie where he talks about like I want to, I just can't do this anymore. When he called him, he talked about Chris, and Carrie was very much like, I thought that, not that it was great, but he's like, I wish I was as brave as he was, because I want to die, but I'm scared of what I can do. And Chris had the balls to kill himself. Like he wanted to die and he got it done. And Kevin says Carrie came off like he respected Chris for killing himself. And that's when he knew, like, I have to, because he knew. Kevin said when Carrie, he had that conversation with Carrie, he immediately called his father and was like, Carrie's gonna do something bad. And the next day, Carrie was dead. They completely glossed over the importance of the bond and everything. It's like you said with him, when his brother died in Japan, it was like they wanted to kind of, because at that point there was 10 minutes left in the movie. Carrie goes that they have the scene with him and his Kevin and his kids.
Not to interrupt you, but I mean, at the end when he chokes Fritz, right? He's choking him. It was like, let's just end this. What they should have did was the real story when Kevin goes and visits his father. The wife is gone. Like they could have just showed that painting scene, and then Fritz is alone in the house.
Right.
Kevin goes in there, and Fritz goes in the cabinet, pulls out the gun, and says, "You're not a man like the rest of you. They took their lives. You're not man enough because you're a waste of life, and I'm gonna kill you." Like they should have showed that scene. Like that was a real scene. Instead, they just do this whole choking thing. And what was the point? So you choked your father and you never spoke to him again? I don't know what happened after that.
Right.
It just was so poorly executed on so many different ways.
And that's the other thing, because Benny touched on it with the timelines, where Fritz and Doris were already on the outs when Carrie died. Like, when like you said, when Kevin went to the house, Fritz was by himself. The whole scene, they kind of rushed the narrative there, but he pulled a gun on his son and they fought, and his son's like, get to basically stay the hell out of my life, and that was it. They were done. And then Fritz ended up dying in, I think, 96, 97 of cancer, but alone, because the family had, what was left of the family had long since abandoned him, including Carrie's children.
Well, here's a scene in music. Here's a scene in movie making. Show Fritz in a friggin' rocking chair in a dark room, rocking back and forth. Establish the fact that he's going to die alone. Like you could have done, and one other point that really bothered me, and then I've said enough bad stuff about the movie. He sells the organization to Jerry Jarrett. You don't even know who Jerry Jarrett is.
Right.
You don't even get what's really even going on. I mean, if there was a time to introduce a wrestler, make it Jerry Lawler. So at least and put a big giant crown on him. So everybody goes, oh, that's Jerry Lawler. Like even the regular fan may even know because he was at the comment. But it's like, they just don't. It's just like, oh, he sold it. Here you go. Good luck. And if you want to wrestle for me, come wrestle for me. Okay, that would be great. Have a good day. Bye. It was like, what is going on in this movie?
It goes to what you said, when we started with the Hellwig reference. He doesn't, when they first have that conversation, he doesn't say Jerry Jarrett. He tells Kevin, he's like, hey, Jerry called again with an offer. I know who Jerry is that's buying wrestling territories. It wasn't even, hey, Jerry Jarrett called, because he said, hey, Jerry called and he had an offer for us. It's like, who the hell is that? Like, I get it, but like you said, I feel we've said enough, Benny. I know you kind of moderated a bit, being the odd man out with the narrative, but I'm going to give the final thought to you, and then Mike and I can say our piece. But final thoughts, your final thoughts on the movie.
Well, I'm going to see it. I'll watch it when I can see it, like on Peacock or Hulu, whatever. But it's one of these things. We always use the term "what if." Gino Hernandez, what if? Magnum TA, what if? Carrie. This is going to be another what if. Like, what if they actually did this movie right? How great could this movie have been? That's what I'm going to think about.
And are you with that, Mike? Again, thanks for all your time. But final thoughts to you. Final thoughts on the movie?
I'll say thank you guys again. Always an honor to be on your show. You guys are doing great. I cannot wait for 2024 working with you guys. Thank you again for this opportunity to talk about this movie. I'll say this. If you're a wrestling fan and you want to see the movie, go see the movie. I follow up with what Benny said. God, if they could have made a really good movie with this could have been something I would watch every time it appeared on the screen, just like I do The Wrestler. I could never turn The Wrestler off, right? The Wrestler's got so many great one-liners in it. I'll sit around just to listen to him go, fresh as monkey breath, fresh as monkey breath, well, whatever. Or you look clean. Like, I know every line in that movie. It's so well done. And this movie is so forgettable. And it's, as a wrestling fan, I'll quickly come out of this. I just want to say this one piece. Growing up, I would, as a wrestling fan, you hid around it. You didn't want anyone to know. You were kind of embarrassed, right? Because people would make fun of you, right? I think some of us have felt that way. And one of the biggest culprits was my father, right? I played baseball as a big-time football player, but my father hated the fact that I liked pro wrestling. Hated it. Hated every time I sat down to watch it. It really bothered him. And as weird as this sounds, as wrong as this sounds, I could remember opening the Daily News here in New York, and there was an article, very small article, and it was pro wrestler kills 2 dogs and beats up 3 policemen. And it's the story of Jimmy Snuka in the, pre-murder of Nancy Argentino. But one of Jimmy Snuka's crazy coke-bound, and I'm a kid at the time, so I don't know he's on coke. But and as wrong as this sounds, I was so happy that he was able to take down 2 dogs and 3 police officers. I'm like, yeah, professional wrestling's fake. Who can handle this guy? This is one of our guys, right? And when I go to these movies, when I saw The Wrestler and came out of The Wrestler, I'm proud to be a wrestling fan. This movie pushed me back. I was embarrassed sitting next to my wife that I made her come to this movie. Yeah. Because she's just looking at me like, what is this? Like, this is bad. And it was bad. It was bad. And as much as, look, they couldn't make a bad movie on the Von Erichs because of my love for the Von Erichs. But they came as close as they possibly could. That's the way I'll leave it at that.
I can't argue with that. I will say my final thoughts are, like I said, if you're a wrestling fan, go see it. If you're not a wrestling fan, go see it and then talk to a wrestling fan or bring a wrestling fan with you. My biggest thought from this movie is it's not going to do, I believe, because I said it's opening numbers. They look like opening weekend was going to be between 5 and 6 million. It's not going to do much after that. It'll fall off. The people that want to see it have seen it already.
Which is good news if you have Max, because it'll be on Max in another month or so.
Correct. I'm just worried because there are stories from wrestling besides the Von Erichs that I believe deserve the Hollywood treatment. And when this movie ends up costing money or not doing what they think, they're not going to want to make another one. No one's going to turn around and do, a real life, I don't know, Ric Flair, Bruno. Nobody's going to want to tell those stories because they tried with the Von Erichs and it didn't work. So we're going to move on and now we're going to make something else.
That's the best point of this whole thing. You're so right. This has ruined the future for any other pro wrestling movie. If this did well, someone would have jumped on a Bruno Sammartino story, which has an amazing story behind it.
Right.
Like you had said, there's so many things, but that's right. It's going to be such box office poison. No one's ever going to go near it. In fact, I'll even go as far as this. I enjoyed No Holds Barred more than I enjoyed this movie. And I'm being serious.
Oh, wow.
I am being 100% serious that I enjoyed No Holds Barred better than this movie. At least I laughed at No Holds Barred, right? I laughed. I was crying in pain during this movie. It was like, what? Listen, I know we have to end. I got to ask you this question, Dan. Weren't you embarrassed during that Harley race promo? Like, weren't you sitting back going, what? This is embarrassing. Like, why are we doing this?
The Harley race, not so much. I was the Ric Flair one though, definitely, because not only was he bad, but it was like you said, it was like 6 or 7 minutes, and then they cut to them in the locker room where, like you said, Ric Flair comes back, and it's like that was between the Harley race bit and Ric Flair. That was 15 minutes, 20 minutes of movie you could have cut and told more personal story. That could have been 20 minutes of Chris Von Erich right there, But
Again,
at least
I'm sitting there watching that Harley race promo, and I'm like, "What? I mean, what are we doing here?" Listen. For a wrestling fan, Harley Race is this incredible superstar. I get
Right.
it. The general public has no idea who this guy is. It's not like they're doing a promo with Hulk Hogan, right?
Yeah.
It's Harley Race. And to make it even worse, back in the day, Harley Race was, out of shape, 40-something-year-old dude.
Yeah.
And this guy portrayed a out of shape, 40-or-so-something dude.
Yeah,
and I'm like, this is embarrassing.
Harley Race was already on the downturn of his career at this point, and you're establishing this is the guy that Fritz is beating his children to be better than, and he's this out of shape old man. Yes, no, I agree. But Benny, you heard it.
Boy.
We always say it on Dan and Benny in the Ring. We love our little exclusives, and you heard Mike Monty say on this show his favorite moment in wrestling movies is Hulk Hogan beating up a henchman after he says Dookie. Clearly, that's your favorite. That
greatest
Dookie
line
joke
ever. Do you smell Dookie? Come on, dude. Listen, I'm gonna challenge you on this, both of you guys, especially when you see it, Benny. You guys remember that line, right? You remember the Dookie line to the day you die. When you're on your deathbed, if someone plays that, you'll be like, no holds barred. You tell me one line out of the Claw that you will remember, because there is none. There is not one line that's even memorable in this movie.
Oh, that's fair point. So there you have it. I mean, that's been great stuff. I always love talking movies. I love talking wrestling. We got to do both tonight. I hope everyone enjoyed themselves. Happy holidays. Mike Monty, thank you so much for joining us. You'll be able to find this video along with so many others, including the 30, a lot of our involvements with you guys, Monty and the Pharaoh on YouTube. Dan and Benny in the Ring can, of course, be heard anywhere podcasts are listened to. For Mike Monty, for the playa himself, Benny Scala, I'm Dan Spasiano. Have a good night, everyone, and we will see you next time we're in the ring.